In today's episode, we welcome Aviral, the founder of a junior VC. A junior VC launched just a few months ago, but it's already seen more than 4,000 applications of entrepreneurs who want to start their journey. And so today we wanted to discuss, should you even start up? That's the topic of our discussion. It's also the topic of the newest newsletter from a junior VC. And we wanted to reflect on our experiences and past conversations with founders about their motivations for taking the 0 to 1 plunge. And so, Aviral, looking forward to jumping into this. Reading the article, I think one thing that really struck me is the line that being an entrepreneur is not a choice, but it's usually forced on those who can't be hired. And there's actually a really big difference between forced entrepreneurs and, the ones we're going to talk about today, which is entrepreneurs who can scale. And so, with that, can you share about your journey? What led you to take the leap into entrepreneurship, and what were some of those key moments that gave you the courage to act?
Firstly, thank you, Mazin. And I think we've all been on this journey together. Obviously, I'm the one who's in the fund, driving things, but there's always the support of the team, and it's a good collective that we built. Been really surprised with the kind of love we've got. So if you go to the ajvc website, you'll also see testimonials from a lot of founders. We've had more than 4,000 applications, like you said. All of this was not something I expected when I started, to be very fair.
In a few months.
It's literally been like, so we got our approval from SEBI in like early September. And it's basically been like 3 months. My target for 12 months was 1,000 applications. So we have clearly outdone that target for 4 years. Entrepreneurship is a pretty abused word also. Like you were saying, and this is something I talked about in my newsletter. So, we started a new newsletter called Fork in the Road. It's actually for people who are interested in the startup ecosystem. Exclusively for them, we actually just launched very quietly, like we did with the original newsletter many years ago, and we got 1,000 subscribers for this newsletter in a few days. And you can subscribe in the link at the bottom. I think entrepreneurship for me was, I think, a dream. I mean, I don't like to use these words, but it was something I wanted to do. But like I talk about in the newsletter as well, most managers, which is people like me, always aspire of being an entrepreneur, but nobody actually becomes one. It's, I think, the classic pastime for people who have done well in their corporate careers and they've been managers, but they never take the leap. And that leap is what I kind of deconstructed in the piece, because I went through that myself. Now, there are, I would say, 2 stages to it. The first is you need to have some independent thought, which results in trying to change the world in a small way, or make some change, right? The idea is that the world works in a way, and I don't think it should work this way. I think it should work in another way, which is better. That is step 1. The first entrepreneurs actually don't have step 1 in place at all. They just like the concept of being an entrepreneur, so they just do it, but they're not really thought of this problem, something that needs to change in the world. And it doesn't need to be really big, right? You can
so people kind of stumble into it. You think it's not as deliberate, right?
It's usually quite organic, to be honest. I've found that there's a very interesting question as a VC, which I've been asked and I've thought about, is when VCs become founders, not investors, but when VCs become founders, do they do well? And I think one opinion I have related to that is that VCs actually analyze markets rather than feeling problems. And I am yet to see any VC actually meaningfully build a large company. especially those who maybe started as analysts or associates in funds. The only one I can think of is of business. And I think he was also an operator and a VC mix. So I don't know if he analyzed the market and jumped into it, but I would say that there are very few. So why I take this example is the problem has to organically come to you. And I don't mean it in like this serendipitous way, and I face this
It
problem.
could be experience, or you've worked on it for a decade. Yes.
You find it doesn't have to be with you necessarily, right? It can be something you observe. Like
Shown
I
to
saw,
you, someone tells you.
yeah,
Yeah.
I saw
Yeah.
Mazin feels problem. I didn't feel the problem, but I saw like Mazin and then three other people like Mazin feel the problem. So there's a problem, right? But I think you have to observe the problem, and then you have to be able to empathize and understand the problem. I don't think there's any way to force fit this, but to be honest, if you're in a if you're in a job and you have been doing it for some time, and you're a person who thinks independently and you observe, you will find problems. It's certain. Like
No, makes
there,
sense.
there will be problems. Now the question is this problem large enough? Do I want to pursue it? There are
Does it
many
align
things
with your
like
interests? There are lots of things. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
all of you who are listening to this, just reflect about the last 3 months or 6 months of whatever you've been doing. There'll be some problems that you have observed or seen. That's a company. Now, venture-backed companies have to be problems that a lot of people face, or many people with money face. Either ways, you should be able to generate revenue. But a general business doesn't have to be problems faced by millions of people. For example, the Kirana store outside my society solves a problem that this society doesn't get X goods in 5 minutes. That's it. That's all. I mean, its utility is that. But there's an entrepreneur there who is the owner of the Kirana store.
Solving a problem for one group of people.
And then there's
Yeah.
the quick commerce companies which are the same problem but scaled as well. So entrepreneurs are across the spectrum. Why I'm saying this is that I think we have this concept of entrepreneurship which is only large companies. It's not. It can be
Yeah.
of variety of types, and problems don't need to be very big. They can be very small from a market size perspective. But you need to have the problem. I think fundamentally, if you don't have the problem, you'll kind of become aimless, and in the situations where things go south, you kind of get stuck, and you don't know what to do. So that's step one, like discovering the problem, having the problem, and it just requires being thoughtful and observing things. I think the second thing which I lacked before I did this was the courage to take the leap. And that's why we call this the motto for the fund is backing the courageous to become entrepreneurs, because once the courage comes, then you become the entrepreneur, right? And we help you get there. A lot of times you need some external nudge or some external validation where someone says, hey, you're good, I'll back you, start. And it kind of happened like that with me also. One of our biggest investors in the fund, he asked me this question, that what do you want to do in life? And I said, like all managers say, I want to start a fund. Of course, I'm just saying it doesn't cost anything to say it, right? And then he paused, and then he says, why don't you start it now? And then I started, giving him like some, I'll do it on 35 and all. And then, he listens to me, and then he's like, yeah, but why don't you start it now? And then I don't have an answer. So I think about this for like a few months. And then I realized that no, I'm just deluding myself. I'm just explaining my lack of courage. Because I'd already discovered the problem that there is this group of founders which is really large, which needs this capital, which actually is a lot of money. 1.5 crores in India is a lot of money. I think the ecosystem has created this image that $1 million bare minimum. No, it's not. 1.5 crores is a lot of money. And there are thousands and thousands of entrepreneurs who probably need like few tens of lakhs to even start, but they don't get access to that capital because venture firms have to write larger check sizes because they are big. So they have to write big checks and they cannot invest in too many companies. So I realized that there's an opportunity to write these size of checks in quite a few companies. And the emergent answer from that is ajvc today, which is back a lot of entrepreneurs and give them their starting capital, make the process very seamless, and it attracts a certain kind of entrepreneur, which is maybe the entrepreneur is figuring out how to start a company. Um, but the idea and the problem statement had become quite clear to me. I'm describing now why it exists. And it's a huge pain point. The founder experience is broken. I've seen it. I've heard founders who I've worked with and invested in previously. Um, they get ghosted. Nobody replies to them. Somebody replies after 30 days. The investment process is really long. It's
So you
arbitrary.
felt the problem over and over again. You knew it was there.
And see, I didn't feel. I mean, I was not the recipient of the problem.
Yeah, good
I
point.
was. I was like I was telling you, right? I didn't feel the problem myself. Although now, as a fund manager, I'm feeling the problem as well. But it's more like for LPs, anybody who wasn't raises money has issues. But most VC processes are not transparent. They're not. You cannot explain why an outcome happened in a particular way. How do you even reach a VC? Why do you need warm connects? Why do you need a referral? There's like a lot of things around a venture firm that make it very hard for many, especially first time founders who have never got access to this ecosystem, to access it. And I felt that there's an opportunity there, that this problem is very apparent now. It's gone beyond my wildest imaginations. It was because 4,000 people applying in 3 months basically means like this problem is huge. And we are a new fund. Obviously there is the advantage of the distribution that's been built, but the problem is very deep. And that's what was clear to me. What I didn't have was the courage. And I think once I got the nudge and I deliberated, and in all honesty, I didn't have an answer as to why I was not doing it today, because I had spent enough time, I had built conviction in the problem, I had enough experience. It seemed like I was just delaying it for no reason. So I took the leap, and it was scary as hell, by the way, after I decided. And it's when you're on your own, it's very freeing and it's very scary. It's like free fall. So you're free, but you're falling also. So you're like scared, but it's exhilarating. You don't know if there's going to be a parachute, and um, I think it's a feeling. If everyone has the opportunity to feel, they should. Not everybody has a financial um, situation to do it. Maybe there are constraints in their lives. This is not something that anyone and everyone can do. But like
I want to dive into what makes it hard, but I think it's important to also talk about why people should not start up, before we talk about starting up.
Oh yeah. So I think we've got an idea of what kind of person should not start a company, like a flavor of it. But I think, and maybe people who read the newsletter will feel like, oh, these elements are there as well. But I think they're very important. Don't start a company if you want to make money, which is like the most counterintuitive thing, but you should not. Don't start a company if you want to be famous. Don't start a company if you want to be cool. Don't start a company because you want to start a company. And I've seen like these 4 reasons are probably primary motivators for a lot of people who don't end up doing well as entrepreneurs. Because
especially the 4th one. I mean, wanting to start a company itself actually is a very big one that I've come across.
Some people just do it for the sake of it. They're like, oh, I should start a company because I should start a company. kind of circular, but it makes sense for the sole reason that you should do it is like disaster. Um, and to be honest, these are all very legitimate outcomes of starting a company, but they shouldn't be reasons to start a company. And I'll tell you why. Because the the process of running a company is so hard that most people see none of this ever, maybe. And and you know, let's say you decided that I want to, and I've seen many entrepreneurs do this. They start a company to make money. At the first sign of trouble, which is like, oh, you're not able to raise, or there's a down round, or people are leaving, they just bounce. Like they just leave. They check out. And that's why I go back to solving the problem, because a startup is essentially a hypothesis of solving a problem statement. Your first hypothesis may not work. It might work partially. Then you discover a new problem. You keep tweaking it. So there are lots of ups and downs. It's not like very linear, especially in the earlier stages. So if you have these four motivators, you're done, in my opinion. You'll get killed by any of these at some point. So I think the motivation for you as a founder should clearly and primarily be that I want to solve this problem. I think it matters to me more than anything else, and I want to do it to the best of my abilities. I think that's what should be your driver. But if you're honest to yourself and you say, oh, this is the reason why I'm starting a company, and it's not that I want to solve a problem, you should not start a company.
That makes sense. And you've spoken about it being hard, but I do want to talk about that. I think there are two parts to it, as you talk about in the essay. The first is the decision making, right? You own your own decisions, and you don't have a boss. And for most managers, I think you can't imagine that until you actually are in that situation.
Yeah, and there's this funny thing I've observed, as an owner. Like I call this the owner mindset or founder mindset, whatever you want to call it. You have fractional bosses, which is like you have lots and lots of bosses, which is your customers, uh, your vendors, lots of them. And they don't come to you like on a regular basis. They come on like an infrequent basis. Um, but you have to be really good to them. And, the honest thing is, anybody who's giving you money or taking money from you and has to return it becomes a boss of yours in some way. I mean, I'm just like using the boss word very loosely, but it's a power dynamic, and there's leverage on one side and on the other. So this is a very unique thing, where maybe you do not engage with these fractional bosses for months, but suddenly like every quarter or every 2 months you'll have like this discussion with your fractional bosses, which are sometimes more stressful than actually being managed by a person, right? So
because it's less predictable, right? And
absolutely, it's unpredictable and it's brutally honest. If your fractional boss doesn't like you, they will cut you.
they'll just stop buying from you. That's it.
Yeah.
Instant feedback.
If you're a consumer brand and your boss is the customer, they say customer is king, and they just decide one day to like just leave you. You can't do anything.
Yeah,
It doesn't. It's not like being fired from a company because that's your whole and soul, but they have the ability to turn it off on you whenever they want. And now imagine you're a B2B company and you have a large client, they just turn you off. You're screwed. Like there's no protection. So that's the interesting dynamic. But I think the great part here is all the all the positioning and the posturing goes away. It's very clear that the other side has an incentive and you have an incentive and you have to solve for the other person's incentive. That's clean. Like if you're very clear with, so our customers are founders, for example. LPs actually are the true customers, but founders are also customers. If you commit to a founder that I will give you an answer in 10 days, more people will come because it makes sense. You don't have to do any positioning to them and say, oh, today I feel like more people should come because somebody else told me, which are things that happen in organizations because you're like pushing paper also a lot of times. Uh, that goes away, which I think is very free. And to be honest, you're on your own for most of the time, but this curiosity uh, has arisen as well, when I look at my time as an entrepreneur.
Which comes back to you needing to be passionate and deeply connected to the problem, right? Otherwise, how do you keep it going? But the other thing that makes it really hard is the social pressure, right? And I mean, I think we've all been through it. It's explaining what you do and your identity coming from your title, your professional role. How do people deal with that?
Yeah, I think for me, thankfully, I've always worked with small firms. So I kind of solved that problem in some way over the last 8 years.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
hypothetically, assume like I was a junior partner at McKinsey or something like that. It's a very big shift. It's like fundamentally two opposite worlds, right? I in fact was meeting of I met a friend a few days ago who was at a bulge bracket private equity firm and who just started his company like 7-8 months ago. He's like, dude, the like when you're in a private equity firm, you call anybody, they'll be there in 2 hours, like for you. And here, as a founder, you call anybody, they'll call you. He was giving me an example of, they're in Delhi and the customer was in Bombay. The customer called them to Bombay for a 5 o'clock meeting. 5:30 doesn't turn up, 6 doesn't turn up, 6:30, no response, nothing. So they go back dejected to Delhi. And then the next day, the guy says, "Oh, I thought it was today at 5." And then they fly again to Bombay. So, you know, it's
Yes.
it's jarring for a lot of people, and this is the dynamic I'm talking about. And these are these are the subtle things. You're not going to have like a lifestyle which is funded by your company. You're not going to be jet setting to many places. Um, People will reach out to you only because of you mostly and not the organization you work for. A lot of people realize that their individual worth actually is not very large because when they leave the organization, they see what it actually is because they know the person because they're working at X organization and not because they're them. So they're like fundamentally big shifts for a lot of people who especially worked at large brand names organizations where things are like very set and clear, but people who work in small organizations have it easier, I think.
No, yeah, it's it's again one of those things that you only see it when you actually go out there, and you can't just get the same meetings that you used to. And I think that's a great example of that. But one more thing that you mentioned, the courage to act independently and act on independent thought rather than come up with your own conclusions and act on it. It seems simple, right? We like to think that we all do that. Why is it not?
Courage is very rare. That's what I've realized. um, I think a lot of people have independent thought, but people with independent thought who don't act on it are academic people.
Arenas.
They are theorize. I mean, and there are academic entrepreneurs as well who like have really independent thought and then create a movement out of it. They popularize a way of thinking. Uh, but
But that's an outlier. I mean, that's yeah.
yeah, it's like Outliers is a good example, Malcolm Gladwell. I don't know if he's an academic as much as a writer, but then there are people who are entrepreneurs as academicians as well. But my broader point is courage is very rare, and it's vanishing actually, like vanishingly rare in the world. And I think most courageous people are entrepreneurs of some sort. They are pushing forward, doing something different, trying to change things for their community, etc. Um, and I think the ability to think independently is a precursor for courage, because courage requires you to be an independent thinker, but it's not sufficient. Like I said, if you're an independent thinker, you may not necessarily act on it. So I think courage is rare. I don't know how to manufacture it or how it manifests or why it happens. And I think that's something I need to think about, like what actually makes a person courageous. But I think some ingredients are like psychological safety, security, being confident, family sorted, financially secure. These things allow you to be a little more courageous. But I still think that it's an inherent human thing.
I mean, but a lot
Because
of people have that, but it's still, you don't take that leap, right? You still
yeah,
don't go and
yeah. A lot of people, have all the things that I'm talking about. In fact, I see so many people who have those things, but they don't, because they're like, oh, I need to work another 5 years before I'll be comfortable. You'll never be.
you keep pushing out the bar. I think that's just,
Rationalization
yeah.
of lack of courage, nothing else.
And talking about that, I want to talk about your trigger and triggers in general. I mean, and do you think people need like a nudge to get to that point? Is that common? And
Yes. I mean, I think the nudge comes from somewhere.
external?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't have data to say. I'm just talking
Yeah,
about my
yeah.
own experience.
But I mean, from a few of the founders that we've spoken to, it's always been an inflection point, like either a job change or a life event or,
Correct.
something like that.
Yeah, it crystallizes. I think in most of the founders I've seen, there's always been something happened due to which it happens. Uh, but I can't say for sure that it's like a purely internal thing or purely external thing. Um, it definitely has to be internal, otherwise you can't act. Like, you have to act. There has to be an internal thing. But something always happens which like makes it that crystal clear path in front of you. That hey, it's very hazy, but it's the crystal clear path. You understand what I'm saying. You don't know how it will look, but you're like, hey, this is the only thing that I'm going to do. So I think there has to be some sort of nudge. I believe it has to be external. I don't know if it has to come from a person. It can come from a group of people. It can happen around you. You might observe it. There might be something that you know triggers a very strong emotion in you, and then you act. So this catalyst has to be there. It can be anything. You might get really frustrated, or someone might shout at you, or you might have a fight with someone, and that pushes you on the threshold to do something. So I think that there has to be something that makes you react and take that call.
Talking about some of the common patterns that we've seen from a lot of the founders we've spoken to, a lot of them grew up in small towns. I don't think it's a coincidence. I want to get your thoughts on like, why do you think
I
that
think
is?
you and I have discussed this a lot. My hypothesis on this one is very simple. It is that people who leave a small town and go to a big town, they've pushed themselves out of a comfortable situation. That's a requirement to be an entrepreneur, which is the leap courage.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
many migrants, especially like in the older days when things were, now you and I are in different countries, we're able to talk, but then you could not talk to somebody who was like even a few hundred kilometers away from you. So they were also entrepreneurs, like the grandparents of a lot of us who migrated from some place in India to another place in India. So I think that has a connection to entrepreneurship, and that leap is nudged there.
Sometimes I think you also see more problems, right? Because you have a broader spectrum, a broader
Yes,
horizon.
that's a good point as well. if you speak to a lot of people or are in different situations very frequently, you will see a broader spectrum problem. That's right. That's right. I also think, and going back to the earlier point I was making, the problem has to be brewing in your head. The other thing I've noticed about entrepreneurs is that they're not blind risk takers. In fact, they completely understand the risks that they're taking. They they have they have a full understanding of what the risk is. They know the risk, they've quantified it, they know how to, they know how to assess it. They may not necessarily know how to handle it or things that may happen later. But I think this is a misnomer that a lot of us hold. I also used to hold that entrepreneurs are risky people. They're actually one of the most de-risked people because they understand the risk. The ability to understand risk is very important. It's not just taking a risk. So they let the idea brew, and then, like in my situation, there was a nudge and then it happened. I think it happens that way a lot with many founders.
And then conviction is natural, right? Like because you de-risked it, and so now you know that, hey, I'm going to make this work. One of the things that we've spoken to almost all our guests about is that first sale or that first customer. And I mean, for you didn't really have that approach, but just curious about how does this kind of connect the dots, and how important is it to have a network to get your first customer versus go out there and talk to people?
Yeah, I mean, I think in my situation, I'd been putting in the work for a long time. You'll be surprised that 100% of our applications are inbound. I have not reached out to anybody. It's all through the distribution. In fact, a lot of our LPs have come through LinkedIn. People, like, when I tell people, they're like, I can't believe
just people reaching out in a few months. Again, it's 3 months.
LinkedIn is just like fun. Nothing happens. I think it's the most underrated and probably the most lucrative social network that's there today. It's super, super powerful. But I had not been writing with the thought process that one day I will raise a fund and blah blah. But it's helped. Yeah. I think. I don't know when I made my first sale, but it happened somewhere in the past. Maybe the first person.
I mean, it's looking back, the dots connect.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it doesn't in the moment, but when you look back, it all makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people romanticize that first sale maybe because it's very important. But I think
it's more a memory. Yeah, I think that's what it is. You're right. That's really, it's just that moment that you can attribute to the beginning.
But I think when you're building, every sale feels good. I mean, I wouldn't say that the first sale and today it's the same feeling. Of course, there's diminished. That's why you remember the first one a lot more. But I think your yardstick changes. So this first sale becomes like larger. You're like, hey, I've done this. Now I want to do like 3x better or 2x better. It keeps changing, and that's the beauty about being a human being. You keep trying to get better. They call it shifting goalposts, but I think it's a positive thing. Where you're like, oh, I've done this. I want to do this. So it's constant, I think, in some way.
One more thing that a lot of our founders have spoken about, and I'm sure you did as well, is talking to your spouse or your parents or your family in general about starting up. First of all, how was that conversation for you? I assume for you it was relatively straightforward.
Yeah, I actually think it was quite easy for me. Thankfully we are in a good situation. We all live together, like in the same apartment, and we're quite close. I remember one of our, I think it was a network founder whose dad didn't speak to him for like a few months because he returned from
yes. Yeah. We got some crazy stories. Yeah.
That sort of situation didn't happen. My wife's been very supportive as well. It wasn't a hard conversation, thankfully. I think everyone was aligned that this is what makes sense.
And one general question for people who are listening: is there a right age to start up?
I don't think there's an answer. So data on this is interesting. So the median age of the Indian entrepreneur is actually 37. It's not like 23 or 24.
It's a bit older than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the US, it's even higher. It's probably because India is a younger country, so it's like shifted by maybe 10 years or something. But the you know the average age of even a unicorn founder is 33, meaning the age at which they become a unicorn, and the age at which they start the company is probably like 26 or 27. So I think it's a factor of how old or young the country is, but I think there is no right age. There is no right answer to that. You can be too young, you can be too old, you can be just right. It really depends.
Or about your situation in life, your support system, your family, your
very contextual.
Whether you find the problem, whether you build the conviction.
Correct. It has to be very contextual, and I think that the only ingredient you need to have is a lot of energy. So it doesn't really matter. If you remember, one of our first guests was a Jaipur Rugs founder. I think when we spoke to him, he was like late 70s. He spoke like a 20-year-old.
Yes.
And that struck me as this common pattern amongst all entrepreneurs is that they're just full of energy. So I don't think the age is as much a driver as the energy levels, and you really need to have very high energy levels.
Talking about the energy levels, I think it's important because it often takes a decade. Even the so-called overnight successes have spent decades getting there.
Yes, Swiggy IPO'd. It's been 10 years as Swiggy and 12 years as actually like one pivot before. So it's a long time. And they've just gone public. It doesn't mean that the founder is, paper wealth is there. For that to convert to liquidity will also take some more time. So it's a really, really long journey. It does not happen fast. In fact, the first few years when most people give up are like this, the excruciating, like small slope. You can feel it, but it's so small nobody can see it. Then it starts like.
Yeah, no, I think my favorite example of that is Upstock, because they said they were opening accounts for years, and it was just gradually until one day it just exploded when the government digitized demat account opening. You need to be there for it to happen.
Absolutely. Correct.
So it's been a pleasure, Aviral, chatting about your journey. One question to wrap up for our listeners: what's some advice that you have for first-time founders, especially ones that are thinking about applying to a junior VC?
I think that if you've decided to start a company, just do it. So my advice is for like two kinds of people. The first is for people who've already made the leap in their head, but they've not done it. They should do it. The second piece of advice is people who found like this really compelling problem but are not taking a leap in their head, do it as well. That is my piece of advice. I think that we are in a very unique point of time in human history. I know that people keep saying that these new technologies, and I think with what AI is doing, at least in my head, is that it's flattened access for a lot of people. Like a young 23-year-old and a old 37-year-old person basically are starting at zero. I fundamentally think that this, plus the fact that I believe that every point of time in human history is unique because something new is going to happen. You should try and take advantage of this new technology that is like happening, and I think that it's going to change the way we live. I'm quite excited by both what's happening in India and in the world, and I think that if you have some thinking on what you could do, or you've already decided, and something's holding you back, just take the plunge. You'll be happy about it.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Great note to wrap this up on. So For those of you listening till the end, take the plunge.
Take the plunge. We are here to support you.